Okay, I'm going to give this a go, but it doesn't sound like it's working.
It is.
It is working. The gentleman in the back, can you hear me all right? I have a high octave voice, so I'm going to try to lower it. I want you to know I feel right at home. Number one, it's windy, and it makes me feel like I'm in western Oklahoma, and I'm from Woodward, so it makes me feel a little bit like home. In any rain, whether it's humid, it makes my hair go flat or anything else. I'm so excited about rain. I got umbrellas in my car and my truck to prove it. So it's a great pleasure to be here. I feel right at home. I grew up with 3 brothers, so I'm used to being surrounded by men, so that makes me feel really comfortable. The ground rules, and these candidates actually know it, is we'll be asking questions. I have the questions. I will let all the gentlemen know. I've actually solicited questions from others, so they won't be just questions that I created myself. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. There's a timekeeper. Raise your hands there. And they will be given, as I said, 90 seconds. They'll be given notice when it's 1 minute and 30 seconds. All right? They have drawn ahead of time in order. They're sitting in the order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll start off with the first question will go to 1. The next question will go to 2, and we'll rotate through. So everybody gets a chance to go first and last. And I think you probably all know who the candidates are. But just so that we can make sure everybody knows, the former Speaker of the House, P.W. Janet, who's someone I have known a long time, and I know we're in your home area. Dr. Kevin Starr. I didn't know you before, but I got to hear you speak at the Republican rally, so it's a great pleasure to welcome you here. Another person I know well, Randy Brogdon, former Senator Randy Brogdon. Could give him a hand. And you know what they say? Just right on time. This is Congressman Langford, James Langford, and again, I feel like I know so many of you all. I consider you all as friends, and I appreciate all that you've done for the party. So, Congressman newcomer to the party, Eric McCrae. It's great to welcome you, and I was a newcomer myself, so I just want to say welcome to the party, and we're glad that you're here. So, okay, everyone knows the ground rules. So why don't we start off with just kind of a get everybody in the flow, and I appreciate it that everybody knows we just have one microphone to share, but this is what you've got to get used to in the Senate. Sometimes things just happen and you're not used to that, and let's go with the flow and see how it works out, how you respond. So the very first question will go to you, TW, and I have asked all of these fine gentlemen if they mind if I just use their first name. That way I get to treat everyone the same. They said that would be fine, so that's the way that we're going to proceed. Okay, TW, our first question, again a question that was actually, I think I solicited this question. Do you plan to commute or move your family to Washington, D.C.? And then once you answer, please comment on that answer.
Appreciate the question, Commissioner. First of all, welcome to Southwest Oklahoma, and hello to my fellow Lawtonians. It's good to see you, and it's good to be home tonight. You know, my wife and I, we haven't put the cart before the horse. When I decided to enter this race, after much prayer, what we both decided was we were going to table that discussion and that issue until we get further along in this race. What we know is that the most important thing to us is our family. And we've approached this idea, this opportunity, this privilege of serving in public office as ministry, and we're going to allow the Lord to lead us on that. But right now, we've not made a discussion on that. We've got a lot of other things to focus on about the future of our country, how we're going to save ourselves from this United States Congress that continues to put us more in debt, continues to add more spending, and they do it in a way that continues to put the future of our kids and grandkids in jeopardy. So right now, we've not made a decision or even had a discussion about it. We said we're going to get further along in this race and then talk about that.
There was a British sociologist by the name of Dunbar. He had this theory which is called Dunbar's number. And the idea basically is this, that a person can only have between 80 and 150 relationships. That is, people that you're close to. As a U.S. Senator, the job of a U.S. Senator is to represent your state. I can tell you exactly where my family will be. they will be in Oklahoma. They will not be going to Washington, because I want my heart and my mind in Oklahoma, period. As your U.S. Senator, that's the only thing I'm interested in, is basically representing this state. Also, so I don't become too close to Washington, you have my word on this right now. If I win, I'll serve this 2-year term. After that's over, I will run one time for a 6-year term. After 8 years, I'm out. Because anybody who's been to Washington more than 8 years, you have to question, do they like Washington better or Oklahoma better? That's a fact. That's human nature. That's not a political question. That's human nature. Anybody who has lived elsewhere knows that after you move, how many friends do you keep in touch with? Not that many. You are loyal to what you're close to. My family, as I said, will be in Oklahoma. They may go see me, during the inauguration, or they might come up there one holiday, but that's it. They are not going to be Washingtonians. They're going to be Oklahomans, period.
I got to believe that Kevin has more friends than 150. Oklahoma's been my home my entire life. It'll be my home if I'm honored. I had the honor of serving you in the U.S. Senate. I could probably be a little bit more emphatic than that. I wouldn't even consider moving my family to Washington, D.C. Because the thing about a U.S. Senator, and Kevin touched on it, is that we do represent you in Congress. And it is important that we get back to the state as quickly as we possibly can and stay here as long as we can. I suspect if I'm serving you in the Senate, I'm going to leave Oklahoma at the last minute, and I'm going to get out of D.C. at the earliest moment that I can to come back home. I love this state. It's a wonderful place to live, and I wouldn't even consider spending any more time than I had to representing you in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Good to be able to be here. Sorry I was cutting it a little bit close. My last meeting was actually in Claremore this afternoon, and so I just arrived. I got here just in time, so thanks for that as well. To answer the question, we will live in Oklahoma. I can show you that based on what we're already doing. I represent the area of central Oklahoma between Bethany and Wewoka right now for the last 3.5 years, and we're in Washington. I'm in Washington 3 weeks a month, back in district 1 week a month. Every single weekend I come home. My wife and my daughters are right there, Hannah and Jordan. They are 17 and 14. I do not want them to grow up with a Washington mentality. I want them to grow up with an Oklahoma mentality. There's an enormous difference between the two. It also makes a big difference for me personally to be able to be back in the state. It makes a difference when you're having dinner on the weekends with lobbyists and with people from Washington, or you're having dinner on the weekends with people from Oklahoma. When I'm at a shopping area, I want to run into Oklahomans. I want to interact with folks. I want them to have an opportunity to be able to bump into me and say, hey, what do you think about? So I think it's extremely important. I think we're about to be down to one microphone before we're done here in just a minute, because it's kicking in and out, I think. Let me say one other thing as well. For us, we're fairly simple and pretty straightforward. I live in my office in Washington, D.C. I don't want Washington, D.C. to be home. I go there, that is the office. I come here, this is home.
Thanks for having us. I want to honor Dr. Coburn and his service and legacy as United States Senator. I've been giving it some thought. I plan to commute as much as possible to stay connected with the people of Oklahoma. I'm trying to get married as soon as possible. That's the case. I've had some talks with Mom and Dad. I'm just being honest, because they're there, and whatever it takes to do things right and to represent the state of Oklahoma, that's what I'm going to do, and that's what my family is going to do also.
Okay, terrific. I've been requested to see if you all would like to stand when you respond, because the people in the back are not actually able to see you, and I think that would help them. So our second question is going to start with you, Kevin, and the question is, how would you propose to reach a balanced budget in the next 4 years, and how would you pay off existing debt?
Sure. Can I take that in reverse order?
You can use your 90 seconds to answer those two questions.
First of all, there's a number of ways of balancing the budget. The purpose of being an American statesman is to serve American citizens first. Now, let me explain one of the things that means. We need to get back to our traditional foreign policy. That's number one, as expressed by George Washington, which basically said, stay out of foreign entanglements. You look after our country and our country first. Actually, our country only, okay? One of the things we've done is we've busted our budget by having commitments all around the world, involving ourselves in shadowy civil wars and getting other people to fight. Now, one of the things we can do is by bringing people back, that will allow us to do a lot towards fixing the budget. I mean, let's face it, two things have basically caused our budget problems. One are these foreign wars that have been lasting for too long. Okay, that's number one. Number two, of course, the bailout. Let me go back to this bailout. This is another problem we have to look at too. The bailout from 2008, basically the Federal Reserve undertook a bond buying policy to the tune of $85 billion a month. We've essentially doubled our money supply. You guys are already paying a hidden tax. When you double your money supply, the value of your money is half. And what that means is that's why you're paying a $5 a gallon for milk, whereas a few years ago it was $1.89 a gallon for milk. So one of the things we have to do is stop the bond buying policy.
Commissioner, thanks for letting me stand up, because the only person I can clearly see is Steve Fair. Great view, isn't it? It's a good view. Good view from down there. Yeah.
Okay, you're 90 seconds to start now.
I know, it won't take me long to answer this one. I have a pretty simple philosophy. Number one, we have to stop the debt. No more increasing the debt. You know, it's pushing $18 trillion now. It is literally bankrupting our kids' future. They're not going to have the same great American dream that each one of us have been able to live so many years if we don't stop the debt. I will not add one penny to the debt as your next U.S. Senator. I subscribe to the Connie Mack penny plan. Now, it's not going to be 5 years. I think if we took 1 penny out of every dollar that is spent, we'd have that budget balanced in about 7 years. The other thing that we need to do is get back to constitutional spending. Article 1, Section 8 spending. It's a pretty simple process. Do you realize that if we would do that today, our entire U.S. budget would be $800 billion. But what is it today? $4.5 trillion. And about three quarters of that last trillion is actually borrowed from our kids' future. Stop the debt. Let's implement the penny plan, and we can get back to square one in a relatively short period of time. Thank you.
I've actually voted for a budget that actually brings us back to balance in 4 years, so I can tell you the exact details of how to actually do that. Serving on the budget committee for the last 3.5 years, very invested into the budget and how to get us out of this. The problem that we have is that over the past several years, you know, we should have been just during the Obama administration. Thank you. Let's try this again. That one's even better. Can you hear it all from that one? Great. So, yeah, we got our own unique challenge. We can either cut in and out or not be heard on this one, so. How about this? So over the last 3.5 years, I can tell you, that's a little tougher. Are we recording on this so we need it? Can I just talk out loud?
It's on the internet.
Okay, well, let me back up. I've worked with teenagers for 22 years, I can yell loud enough. So the last 3.5 years I've worked on the budget committee, I can tell you exactly the issues that need to be accomplished to be able to get us back into balance. The budget that we're dealing with is a bigger mess than you can possibly imagine. And I wish I could tell you it was just happening during the Obama administration. It wasn't. This has been growing for the last 20 years and has been a tremendous amount of irresponsibility. 49 states, including our own, have a constitutional requirement to balance a budget. Oklahoma has to balance a budget, balances its budget every single year, has for years and years and years and years, because it's required to. The United States Constitution does not require that. I would pass a balanced budget amendment requiring that. I'd also start to deal with our entitlements. I can identify $100 billion a year in entitlement waste right now, including what's happening to EITC, which is $15 billion a year that flies right out the door. So there are major issues, but you've got to get down to the exact same spots that need to be identified to be able to identify those and to be able to get rid of it.
If the deficit and the debt is the problem, then there's no point in adding on to it. We need to balance the budget now. How I would do it, we've spent $683 billion on our military last year, $187 billion of that on our offensive military presence in the Persian Gulf. Even if we could maintain that spending, I wouldn't do it based on principle, because it's costing us $221 billion a year to service that debt. That's money down the drain. So I would take that $187 billion, put that directly towards paying down the debt. Let's see, we $500 billion in welfare. In principle, I think welfare entitlement spending, if it's going to be done, needs to be done at the state and local level. So take the $500 billion there. I would privatize Social Security. I would privatize the post office. They're not running a profit on a monopoly. They're the only ones who can deliver mail, and they still can't run a profit there. So I got tons of ideas. So I don't even know where else to go. But how much more time we got?
15 seconds.
$600 billion in energy revenues we are spending overseas. We can bring all that money back, kickstart our economy even better, which will raise tax revenues. There's tons of ways that we can do what we have to do to get our spending in check.
GW.
Well, the first thing I would say that we can do that will set this country right on the right path toward a balanced budget is getting rid of Harry Reid as the leader of the United States. And I think the second thing is we've got to be focused, like Dr. Coburn, on the waste, fraud, and abuse that we see over and over again coming out of the United States Congress, as well as the other federal agencies. And one of the first things I've called for as the next United States Senator is an elimination of an abolishment of the EPA. I think that the EPA we continue to see the EPA to go after and become the political arm of this administration, and to go after private business, to go after the private sector, and to squelch our economy. What we need to do is to grow our economy so that we can get back to a balanced budget. But right now, as has already been mentioned, 2/3 of our spending right now is actually done as a result of, 2/3 of the spending is actually entitlement spending, and we've got to have a real discussion about entitlement reform, but also abolish something else we can celebrate. I see Representative Cootie here and others. We passed, just in the state legislature this past week, the last week of session, we actually moved and voted with a bill that I co-authored to get rid of Common Core, something that getting the federal government out of education altogether. We can abolish the U.S. Department of Education as well.
We don't lack for ideas among this group, do we? Isn't that correct? Okay, Randy, the next question is for you. Summarize your position on foreign policy and the issues you believe are most significant.
I believe that we need to have a very robust, diplomatic, open dialogue with our trading partners, first and foremost. And to back that up, we need a very strong defensive military. But on top of that, we need to probably do a BRAC-type commission with 900 bases in the 130 countries that we have around this world. 900 bases. And we put our nose in other countries, sometimes their business, where our business doesn't belong. And other countries resent us because of that. And I believe the old approach that like Jefferson said, we have trade with all and entangling alliances with none. And if we would open the markets with free trade rather than the managed trade and have such a trade deficit on our side, that will bring jobs back to this country. We export jobs because of our trade policies. We export jobs and manufacturing because of the regulations and the tax burden on our companies. So, strong diplomatic ties and conversations with our trading partners, and have a military defensive system second to none to mind our own business at home.
The United States should be the exporter of liberty. We have what the world wants: liberty, freedom. When we live out our liberty and our freedom, other countries know about it, desire it, want it. It's how we brought down the Soviet Union. It was a push-up to push their economy, and it was the opening up of what Gorbachev thought he could open up just a little bit of liberty, and he found out that when he cracked the door open for liberty, it just came rushing in and collapsed their system. We export liberty. And when we do that, to be able to promote that around the world, it makes a huge difference both in our nation and in nations around the world. We're a nation that sets the tone, and we should continue to do that. We should also help nations establish what's called civil societies, the structure. We watched the Arab Spring, but really they ended up swapping one dictator for another dictator, because there's no structure underneath to actually rise up and to be able to help them have that. We should be engaged in diplomatic ways to be able to help train up people in the next generation to be able to turn that around. Right now in our foreign policy, this president has our foreign policy so convoluted. Our friends don't know who they are and they don't trust us, and our enemies don't fear us anymore. And we can see that over and over again. I met with Benjamin Netanyahu last November in the P5+1 negotiations dealing with Iran and Israel and the United States. Secretary Kerry met. 3 hours later, I was part of a delegation that then met with Benjamin Netanyahu in his office. He began that conversation with, "This is the best possible deal I can imagine for Iran." Israel has found the United States in a position like Switzerland rather than where we should be, strong, and as American, that we can only be that strong spot to be able to bring stability to the world.
I would eliminate our foreign aid. $1 billion to Pakistan is not foreign aid, it's tribute. Whenever the Taliban came out of Pakistan, that incenses me that we pay tribute to that country of all countries. I would say out of internal affairs, this administration has made so many messes across the world, and a lot of us don't even know it. They're stirring up the mess down in Latin America between Honduras and El Salvador, selling planes. We've got them in Kenya, telling Kenya that they have to amend their constitution to allow gay marriage, or we're going to pull our foreign funding from them. I've heard this firsthand. And the hypocrisy of the administration to preach tolerance and to go to another country and try to dictate domestic affairs to them is beyond me. So we could take a stand in the Senate to make sure our the spending that we do matches the values that we need. I would pursue reciprocal trade agreements with countries. Turkey, they discriminate against our doctors, against our lawyers, but they expect to be able to send their doctors and lawyers to our country, and that's not right. And so there's lots of areas where we could adjust our foreign policy.
Well, first of all, as it relates to foreign policy, number one, my philosophy is peace through strength. Under no circumstances should the United States of America be negotiating with terrorists. That's where we need to start. As to the second part of the question, what's the most important, pressing issue right now? I would have to agree it's Iran, a nuclearized Iran. Under no circumstances can we allow Iran to become nuclearized, and we need to do everything we can to support our number one ally in the region, the only democracy there in Israel. So we should be leading through peace, through strength, and make sure that we keep our commitments. But also, the world needs to know that when America says it's going to do something, we keep our word. That's my philosophy, and that's how we should support. And I would add this. The other thing I would add is we have to do it through strength. We have to have the number one United States, have to have the number one military in the world. What we've seen from this administration is a disarming of America. We've seen troop sizes reduced, and we've seen investment in our defense reduced. We need to change that tide, and it's going to take leadership to do it.
First of all, I want to mention this. If you really want to see a sane foreign policy, go back to Washington's farewell address. There's nothing I can say that will be better than that. Having said that, I'll try my best. The job of America is not to be the exporter of liberty. That's not our job. Our job is to look after ourselves. Let me explain what happens when you become the exporter of liberty. Jimmy Carter tried that in Iran. Remember the brutal Shah? Saw where that got us. You know, the Belgians, when they tried this in, when they pulled out of Rwanda. Well, we need to teach them, all men are created equal. And then all these Tutsis started saying, we're all equal? Well, all the Hutus started saying, the Tutsis, they don't treat us equal, let's get back. And what we had was a slaughter. So taking the idea of all men are created equal to a culture that doesn't have a heritage of constitutionalism, you lead to genocide. So we need to stay out of this stuff if we don't know what we're doing. The second thing is this: you have to deal with countries according to whether they have chaos or order. If you have a history of order, you can deal with them. If it's a place like Somalia, you can't deal with that. I mean, it's kind of like this. The Benghazi crisis. You know what the real crisis of Benghazi is? Why do we have diplomats there in the first place? Shouldn't we have learned our lesson in Somalia in the 90s? We need a sane foreign policy. And don't get in shadowy civil wars. And by the way, Putin's a bad guy, but he's not Hitler of 1939. Russia has fewer people in it now than Nigeria does. Do you think if they actually overran the Ukraine, they could stay there? It's not our fight.
Okay, we're gonna shift gears a little. I'm not sure, is this working in the back?
Yes,
you can hear? All right. We all know that Oklahoma is a leader in oil and gas drilling and development. This question concerns LNG export. I just returned from a utility conference in Indiana, and it was very interesting, some of the things that I heard there. So this question, and it'll start with James first. It seems like the U.S. is in a good position to be strong in the global gas market, but there is also a time window for permitting LNG exports into the world market. The Department of Energy is asking whether exports are in the U.S. interest, and others are wondering if the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission should be taking the lead on this issue. What can Congress do to expedite the process for permitting through FERC, the DOE, and other necessary federal agencies?
Well, glad you asked. I just changed that a week and a half ago. That used to be true. But if you get the latest information, I just got on the phone with Chris Smith, who's the head of fossil fuels for the Department of Energy. I spent 2 years negotiating with the Department of Energy, 3 different hearings in the committee that I chair dealing with energy policy. And as of last Thursday, the Department of Energy just changed their policy to what you just described, what I have worked for the past 2 years. Here's what just occurred. This administration did not want to export liquefied natural gas. This nation is plentiful in natural gas. It was my great frustration that a lot of people in Congress were just complaining about the gridlock. And I don't like just hearing the griping that there's gridlock. There's something that can be done. And so I started working behind the scenes with the Department of Energy. I started working, bringing up hearings, bringing people to the Hill. The last hearing that I had the folks from the State Department and from the Department of Energy. We brought those folks to the Hill. We walked through the process. A week later, we follow up again. After 2 years of working through this, they caved. And the Obama administration changed the rules back to what I had requested, and that was to start the FERC process first, what you just described, get this out of the way and get it going, and now the DOE process is at the end. What does that do? It gets us exporting natural gas 2.5 years faster. It deals with the ambassadors that I've talked with Hungary, with Lithuania, with the Ukraine that I started meeting with 2 years ago to start getting the export of natural gas around the world. This is our single greatest geopolitical power base, is to export our energy. Now we're finally starting to do it.
Exactly right. Exports are good for our economy. It's good for our foreign policy. We can alleviate the pressure that Russia is putting on our allies through, as you know, Russia has, that's where a lot of the natural gas goes into Europe and to the Ukraine. So if we can expedite the process, answer your question directly, Congress needs to get out of the way with the permitting. The experts are in the business environment. They know how to do what they're doing, and that's what I would say.
Yes, we absolutely should be exporting LNG, but I would say also, even before we get there, we need to be, very much focused on removing the regulations that forbid us from drilling on our own federal lands right now. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, is that we have natural gas, as was already mentioned. We have a lot of it in this country. We've been blessed with all the natural resources any country could ever want, but we have an hyperactive regulatory environment that prevents us from drilling in many places. Here in Oklahoma, as Speaker of the House, we actually fought to remove regulations to encourage more drilling, and we're seeing the results of it. There's a reason that Oklahoma has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation, 5.4%. There's a reason that we've continued to encourage investment in this state. There's a reason that you see we're in the top 10 of states of people relocating to a state looking for job opportunity. It's because we've created an environment where capital can grow. My mentor, J.C. Watts, always said that capital is a coward. It will not flow to a hostile environment. So what we need to do is remove regulations that the EPA has placed that forbids us from drilling on our own federal lands so that we can have even more production. Energy independence can be a reality in this generation, but it's going to take leadership to get it done.
One thing we need to always look at is motivation. Why do people pursue certain policies? And it's clear to me that Mr. Obama follows radical environmentalists. I think he has to piece those in his own party. I think he also may favor certain industries over others, so that he may have something out for the oil and gas industry, because he may want to spark other types of energies, because maybe those people contribute. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. So always look at motivation. Now, having said that, let me explain how I would deal with the question that you just answered, and it goes back to motivation. First of all, it's good normally, especially with manufacturing goods, it's always good to have exports. And normally that's true with commodities as well, normally. I would support the export of natural gas, with the exception of one condition. If we are importing natural gas, don't export what we have, because that's not fair to American consumers. Now, if that's not the case, export it. Because already we allow foreign countries to get dibs on our lumber and our coal. That's corrupt, and that's got to stop. So let's think about motivation before we decide whether it's good or bad to export it. Let's make sure that we're not costing American consumers first. That's important. That's why I'm a conservative who understands working families. Thank you.
Well, all of this is easily solved, believe it or not, just by utilizing free market principles. You know, we shouldn't have to get up every morning and wonder what the government's going to do to us today. And if you just break it down to the most simple level, Congress shouldn't even have its nose when it comes to what we produce here in Oklahoma. And we're lucky here in Oklahoma. We are a very rich energy state. What do the politicians in Washington, D.C. in Congress have any knowledge about our energy here in this state? A big fat goose egg. They know nothing, yet they're making policies on how we drill, where we drill, when we drill, if we drill, or if we mine. We see what Obama's doing to the coal industry. And Commissioner, I hope you have an opportunity to buck up this latest Supreme Court decision. Our utility rates are getting ready to go through the roof because of bad ideas from Washington, D.C. It's over and over again. I spent 30 years in business for myself, and I realized that competition breeds excellence. I had to be better tomorrow than I was yesterday if I wanted to stay in business. And Americanism, entrepreneurialism, that is the secret to our success. And like Reagan used to say, government's not the answer, government is the problem. Get it out of the way.
Eric, this question, we'll start with you. From Brogdon to Benghazi and in between, what do you see as the worst scandal of this Obama administration?
Well, the entire administration has been stonewalling Congress at any opportunity that have. To answer your question, probably the deaths of the ambassador in Libya. That, to me, the fact that our commander-in-chief did not do everything he could within his power to save their lives, and then to compare that to the effort and the supposed expediency that he had to get this deserter free, it just does not equate. Adding that up with who he released when he did that, it's just the whole entire administration has been a scandal from the get-go.
The biggest problem with this administration and these scandals that we keep having is we don't know which one is the worst one because we haven't had a Congress that has gotten us the answers. We don't know yet which is worse. We don't have all the answers. I certainly have been guys that you name, and there are a number that we could start listing, but at the end of the day, the biggest challenge is we have an administration that continues to trample the Constitution of the United States through the executive order. And we need leaders that are going to go to Washington, D.C. and push back against that. As the Speaker of the House, we actually focused on this a lot, pushing back against the federal intrusion that we see. I created the first ever States' Rights Committee because we know if there's going to be reform in this country, it's going to happen at the local level, not in Washington, D.C. So as far as the question directly, man, that's a hard one. Which is the worst scandal? I don't know yet because there's so many still coming out, and we still don't know and have the answers to any of them because we've had an administration that has refused to be held accountable, and we've had a Congress that's refused to hold them accountable.
Answer the second biggest before I answer the biggest. The second biggest would be foreign policy things. These aren't, there's something bigger than that. But foreign policy, first of all, sticking his nose in the Syrian civil war and saying, we're going to get Assad. Maybe not. He shouldn't have done it in the first place, but then once he did, he put our reputation on. I'm not saying get Assad, he should have said it in the first place. Once you said it, you got to back it up. Same thing when we have the dealings with Russia over the Ukraine. But the fact is, as an American citizen, I'm really more concerned about domestic issues. I'll tell you the real scandal. The real scandal is not Obama. It's really not. You know, if you remember when Obama campaigned, he told you what he's going to do. I'll give him that. He is honest. He told you what he's going to do. He doesn't respect at all constitutional limits. The real scandal is the American Senate, American House of Representatives for not standing up to him and saying, you need to respect your constitutional limits. Because the fact is, we're getting a guy who's ruling through executive order. And that's the problem of the Congress, not him. We need to rein him in. So the big scandal is not his, it's the Congress's scandal. That's a fact.
I think the biggest scandal is Obamacare. Taking 1/6 of our nation's economy and transferring it from the people's hands to government. What a transfer of power that is. That is a scandal that we may not live down for a long, long time. Why? Because we don't have any leadership in Washington, D.C. And now I'm talking about Republicans. The Republicans have backed off, and now we see that, well, we're moving on to other things. Brogdon, this last week, the exchange of 5 bad criminals. We talked about them the other night. Now, I agree that maybe we should go get that prisoner of war. We should. We shouldn't be leaving anybody behind. We have ways to do that without a 5-for-1 prisoner exchange. I think that is despicable. Last Tuesday, I called for President Obama's impeachment because of that. That was against the law. As a matter of fact, my wife asked me last night, she said, "Huh, did you call for Obama's impeachment?" And I said, "I did." She said, "Don't you think you should tell me that when you do stuff like that?" I said, "Oh, I forgot you're not listening to the news right now." But this administration is rotten with scandals. And until we find Republicans that will serve us wisely, nothing's going to change.
It sounds like I need to give an update on all the research on what's happening on all the scandals. Start to finish. When I came into Congress, the first thing that we dealt with on the Oversight Government Reform Committee, which I'm a member of, serving Darrell Lyson, Trey Gowdy, and Jason Chaffetz, and Jim Jordan and others, is we started through the process on Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious was the first thing I got to get a chance to get a baptism on, where this Department of Justice and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms allowed gun walking, and allowed hundreds of weapons to be able to cross the border that they had no way to be able to inspect. We started our process going through that. The Department of Justice came in and said, we're going to inspect ourselves and determine whether we're okay. They gathered 80,000 documents to do their own inspection, and at the end of that, they said we checked out fine. So we said we'd like to see those documents. They said no, they're executive. So we subpoenaed those documents, and they said no, you can't have them. And so we held Eric Holder in contempt of Congress, the first Attorney General in the history of the United States to be held in contempt of Congress. Then we started the judicial proceedings. You see, the Congress can't run over to the White House and beat down the door. We have to follow the actual Constitution. So we went to the judicial branch and started the legal proceedings to hold them to account. We've been through 2 court hearings already, and we won both of those. And then we're in the middle of our third, just finished oral arguments on that one, and we'll win that one as well. And we will compel the Attorney General to turn over the documents that we have subpoenaed. As we work through the Benghazi investigations, we've taken this a step at a time. This is not talk radio. This is the United States Congress. There's an appropriate path to take it with urgency and diligence and to take these things on. And that's happening, and we're pulling things apart. And by the way, last month, we got Lois Lerner's emails that we were told we would never get. We have those, and we're working through the IRS scandal a step at a time, the right way.
Questions. I think you've all done great. Why don't you stand up, take a deep breath, and we're going to start back down the line in just a minute. So everybody, we're taking the 7th inning stretch a little early. It's a little warm up here, I might tell you. I'm assuming some of you are warm. They've done a great job, haven't they? Stand up, feel free to stretch too. That'd be great. 7th inning stretch early.
I have a tripod that I hit that phone. I will bring it to you. It's got a slip over cover thing you can sit there on a tripod with a stand. I will bring that to you. Well, I've been in television production for decades. That's my cell number on it. Yeah, I'm not a television production. Everything right now, I stream a live It's a major stroke.
These gentlemen are the ones that suggested that you all get to stand up. It's like church, everybody wants to go to church. Okay, we're going to start back with you, TW. This question is, the Obama administration has proposed using Fort Sill to house illegal aliens who are currently crossing the borders. What's your answer to deal with immigration?
Well, first of all, we need to secure the borders. That's the first thing. In the same breath, we need to say no to amnesty. This idea that we would actually reward people for breaking our law is unconscionable. The American people, we are a nation governed by the rule of law, not the rule of man. We need to say no to amnesty, and we need to secure the borders, and we need to do it right away. This is not just a matter, and let me say this, it's not really a matter of even immigration reform. That's not what this is about. This is a matter of national security. We must know who's coming in this country and who's in this country, and right now, we don't.
First of all, they don't need to be housed here, they need to go back. That's number one. Now, the borders need to be secure. I'll tell you how to do that. You can build a fence where there's not a river. Where there is a river, we can use drones, and we can track people coming across. And they can lead you to their safe houses, and then you deport them. I had a question last night at our board, and they started off with saying, since it's unfeasible to deport blah, 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 and I got up and I said, well, that's a fallacious statement. Eisenhower did this. 1 million. We have 11 million right now. That doesn't mean round up everybody at one fell swoop, but it means enforcing the law, and as you catch them, send them back. That's number one. If you're hit, now let's talk about amnesty. You can go look at my record since I've been in this campaign. I have consistently said no amnesty ever. Not under any certain, like, change the words, and maybe we'll let these people, no amnesty if you've been here, if you came in illegally. Because if you come here illegally, you started off breaking our laws, what makes you think you'll ever be a good citizen? Also, we're not going to have 11 million competitors for American jobs. Now, a number of people in this race will say, we don't support an amnesty. And well, Randy says he means it, okay? But let me tell you, go and look and see who's funding people's races. And see what those people's stance is on amnesty. Check this. This is your guys' task. You're the citizens. If you want a republic to function, you need to do research on all of us. Because someday you may say, he said, well, I'm telling you, follow the money and see who endorses people. And then you'll know who's gonna stay firm in the amnesty question.
This may come as a surprise to a lot of us in here, but there's no constitutional authority in Article 1, Section 8 for Congress to have any immigration policy. The only thing that Congress can do is set the rules and laws for naturalization. That's it. So we need to get this debate back to the states. And I'm going to take you back to my 30-year business career. When I was able to hire somebody and pay them the wage that I wanted to because they wanted to work for me, and the dollar that I'm giving them was a good exchange for the services that they were providing me, that's how it's supposed to work. And that has a lot to do with our immigration system we have today. We didn't used to have an immigration problem until the federal government got involved. You realize that the state of Oklahoma and every other state in the union used to have immigration depots. And people would come in and work, and they would get through working illegally, and then they would go back home and spend their money. The other thing that we could do to fix immigration is to start repairing our welfare system. No one deserves anything, even American citizens. The only thing that we deserve is the God-given rights of life and liberty. We're not guaranteed anything else. And we should not look to government to provide us something else. So fix the welfare system, and I assure you, a big part of our immigration conversation will go away very quickly.
We most certainly need to secure the borders. And for all the folks that say, I'm sorry, our borders are large and we can't secure it, come on. If you ever go to Israel, you'll find a secure border. Okay? If you have the will to do it, you can actually do it. But it doesn't need to be what the Senate proposal was. That was just add 20,000 more Border Patrol agents. I visited with the Border Patrol folks. They'll tell you, they don't need 20,000 more people. They need better technology. They've got legacy technology trying to deal with this current situation, the flood of people. How bad has it become? This president continues to incentivize illegal activity and continues to speak openly about creating citizens, and it's incentivizing people to come. We have border crossings now in border regions from year to year, 2 years ago to last year, 168% increase in unaccompanied minors crossing the border. We're talking about people sending across children across deserts, unaccompanied, in the hands of coyotes. It's a dangerous thing. This government is incentivizing that dangerous activity. It's bad for children. I don't care where they're from. That's bad for children. That's bad for families. That's wrong to do. We need to secure our border. We need to deal with interior security. 40% of the people that are here illegally came here legally and never left. We know who they are. We have biometric information about them. We just never asked them to leave. We've got to build interior security, and we've got to deal with border security. We cannot incentivize this, and no, Fort Sill should not take on unaccompanied minors until they get transitioned, according to the administration, into a family here. We need to be able to lovingly, with a great way, as only we can do as Americans, help transition them back home, is really to be able to transition back to.
The two major issues of immigration is really border security and implementation of the rule of law. It has national security implications. When we don't secure our borders, the terrorists are going to exploit those drug routes. They've already discovered terrorist propaganda on borders, and you can look at Israel, what these people are doing to Israel, and they're going to do to us. So we need to wake up and be prepared. Healthcare, giving healthcare to immigrants, and it's a step towards giving them voting rights, which is just an attempt by the left to preserve their power, and it's an unconstitutional power grab.
Okay, Steve, we're going to improvise because, you know, we're functioning on a limited budget. We've got one microphone that you all are going to share, and I'm glad to know that we're sharing it, so thank you. Isn't that
We're
that's
good
great?
Republicans. We
That's
don't
right.
elect it.
There we go. Okay. Kevin, the next question is for you. Education, a hot topic across the country and even in our own state. What role should the federal education department have in our children's education?
Correct. They've got it. Let's see. None. The fact is, you never want to give power to Washington. Okay? If you've traveled around the country, you know this. Oklahoma is not like other states. That's a good thing. Oklahomans are not like other people in other states. That's a good thing. And when you federalize any system, you're giving the power to Washington. That's a mistake. Now, some people will say, well, what about in the STEM, the STEM areas, science, technology, all of this? Let me explain that to you. When the federal government gets involved in that, already, if you look last year, we had a few 100,000 people in the STEM areas that couldn't get jobs anyway. We have an overproduction. And you always see this idea of bringing more STEM workers in from overseas because they say we don't have enough. No, the federal government gets in this program to try to create more STEM workers, people in science and technology. That's basically just a way of lowering the wages of people who have jobs, of lowering people like engineers, computer programs, their wages. So you're basically using your taxpayer money to lower your wages. That's not right. That's the collusion of big government and big business. And that's bad. Keep it close. Big government's bad, but the collusion between the two is even worse.
Yeah, the obvious answer to that question is the federal government doesn't have anything to do with our local school system. Certainly shouldn't, but you know what? It does, and you know why? Because our state leaders stand there at 23rd and Lincoln and with their hand out and say, we need some more of that free money. And it has encumbered this state. We saw it with the Common Core fights been going on for several years. And finally this week, Governor Fallon did the right thing and signed that bill and I think I heard today that Oklahoma is the first state in the country to get rid of Common Core. And hats off to her. But you know what? The federal government has no authority in our local school system. None whatsoever. It's not in Article 1, Section 8. And I get tired of even having these kinds of discussions because we waste so much time on something the federal government has no authority over. Why are we even discussing it? Education is left to moms and dads, first of all. And as Kevin said, get it right close to the people. If you want to have some state funds going into your local school system, that's one thing. We have that right living in this wonderful republic. But the federal government has got to be ejected, and the best way that I think we can do that would be to eliminate the Department of Education. And that's on my hit list.
The federal government doesn't have a role in education. Oklahoma's done a great job of protecting education. From our own state constitution that protects homeschooling to what we choose to do on this. We need to protect education of our own children. We drive that. That is not a constitutional responsibility, nor is it even a good idea. Try to find an area of the federal government that you look at and think, gosh, I wish they could also handle our children's education, because they did that so well, they would do those kids' education so well. Now, the frustration that I have is, in 2009, in the stimulus program, the federal government created the Common Core test and created the process of how to be able to federalize education all across the country. In states across the United States, including our own, in our own House and Senate and Governor signed a bill to be able to take that on in our state as well. I wish we would not have done that. But we wanted the money, and so we did it as a state legislature, they did it. I can tell you when I came up to the federal Congress, the very next year, we took on what's called the Student Success Act, taking away the right of the federal government to impose Common Core across the entire country, and to be able to push that back. I've met with federal regulators from the Department of Education in my office privately, off of the cameras, off of everything else, and started talking through the process of how we get Oklahoma out of this. and how we can work behind the scenes to make sure that they understand Oklahoma will choose its own way. Now, I don't go back as a federal regulator, legislator, holy cow, we'd never be a federal regulator, as a federal legislator and go tell our legislators what to do. That's not my responsibility. They choose what to do, and they lead, and they do a great job. But it is my responsibility to push this federal government in every way that I can to get out of the way of our state, and I'll continue to do that.
Did you draft legislation to eliminate the Department of Education? We do need to get rid of the Department of Education. That's a good place to start our cutting of the budget. The administration is using the Department of Education to promote their socialist, their cultural agenda. We must win the battle we must win the cultural battle. It starts at home, it starts in the States, and the administration, through their curriculum, is pushing atheism. They talk tolerance, but they're not tolerant. So we need to win that battle. It starts with limited government. It starts with getting rid of the Department of Education. And I just want to say, the Founding Fathers, they didn't even trust themselves. That's why they set up separation of powers. That's why we have limited government. That's why we have the 10th Amendment that reserves powers and rights for the states. And you're right, Mr. Brogdon, that the right of choosing what to do with education is a prerogative of the states.
Parents should decide about the education of their children, not the state, not the federal government. Parents should be in control of their parents' education, of their child's education. I was very proud this past session to co-author the bill that actually repealed Common Core from Oklahoma. The big challenge with the federal takeover of our education system is look at what they've done with our healthcare system. I mean, can you imagine what an education system that is federalized would look like? And it's been said, you're right, states have become addicted to federal dollars. We have an addiction problem in this country. It's to federal dollars, and that's why, as Speaker of the House, I stood up and created the first States' Rights Committee. We actually were the first legislature, one of the first in the country, to actually move to nullify Obamacare, because we felt that strongly about a federal takeover of our healthcare system. We also have a challenge with pushing back against in the areas of education. That's why we offered the bill to remove Common Core. The biggest challenge is we have a government that thinks it can do it better than parents. Parents should be making decisions about their child's education, not the government.
Okay, I believe we're ready for Randy. Is that right? Okay. All right. And you have to remember some of these questions, you all, it's interesting because I talk to a lot of different people to get some of these questions, so I think it's important to know that just the general public is continuing to ask the questions about education and some of these other things, so I appreciate these gentlemen all responding to that. So, how about we just take a breath here for a minute, and I'm going to shift gears. As you can tell, I'm shifting gears all over the place for you guys, from foreign policy to energy to everything else. So, how about a question, who do you most closely associate yourself with in the Bible, and why? Careful. I thought we needed to...
It's not rude. Well, politically speaking, I would say David. You know, I view my race here, and actually I view my entire political service as a David and Goliath battle. I fight the big boys all the time, and as a grassroots Tea Party type, constitutional conservative with the highest voting record in the state Senate for 8 years, there's a lot of what I describe as a tall building crowd and the chamber crowds and the political insiders in Washington, D.C. that take a rather dim view of my conservative credentials. And so, David would probably be my best answer. That's about spiritual as I'll be.
That is a great question, Dan. I would say Paul, for me. I have great love for the writings of Paul. and for what he does, but for me, this is a journey issue. Paul set out on a journey and did not expect where he was going. But God completely interrupted his life. I served 22 years in full-time ministry, working with middle school students, high school students, and college students. I was the director of the Falls Creek Youth Camp, serving 13 years, directing the largest Christian camp, well, actually the largest camp of any type in America, and that was a tremendous privilege to do that. It is an unbelievable thing to stand here with you on a Friday night when somewhat my heart is still thinking about the invitation that's happening at Falls Creek in about 30 minutes on this Friday night as well. But let me tell you this. Paul was hit at Damascus with a clear calling. Annas came and was complaining with God, saying, God, I can't go talk to this person, you know he is. And God said, no, no, no. This guy is my chosen instrument to the Jews, the Gentiles, and the Gentile kings. And he set aside to go make this person your mouthpiece. I don't understand all the whys and whys. But in 2008 and 2009, my wife and I both clearly heard God call us and say, this is what I want you to do. We spent 7 months struggling and praying through that. Finally came to the point in time where we had to say, I'm going to be an old man one day, tell my grandchildren by the time I didn't follow God, if I don't do this. And my calling to go to Congress has twofold. One is to be an effective legislator, because I want other Christian legislators to follow me. I want our district to say, elect people like that because they'll get the job done. But also I have a missional task. That when I get there, my job is to be able to share Christ with the people around me. And I've done that. And I've been honored to be able to lead other members to Christ, even lead lobbyists to Christ while I've been there. So I would say Paul is really a model for me.
I would say Daniel. I've done Daniel fasts. I've done prayers. And Daniel was someone who he understood where he was at, and he saw the future. I spent a week in Iran. I had a lot of good experiences there, a lot of bad experiences, and I just remember one time I was singing so much I just stopped talking for a day. So they brought me before the pastors there, and all of a sudden I just said out of my mouth, I said, I was Daniel in church plays growing up, and I've always thought about being the president of the United States of America. I said this right in the middle of Iran, and all this stuff was going on. I couldn't believe it came out of my mouth. But I do want to say something about something that I did see a month or two ago. I saw the biggest, baddest aircraft carrier battleship. I mean, this was top-of-the-line technology. This was the ship. This was it. And the name of that ship was the USS Tom Coburn. And it was so real, I looked it up online, and there's not a USS Tom Coburn yet. But later on the day, I was on the deck of that ship, and all of a sudden the deck became, it wasn't the state of Oklahoma, it was the entire lower 48. And I just believe that Tom Coburn has done so much to pave the way to fight against waste, fraud, and abuse, and ultimately to protect our freedoms. He fought against the bridge to nowhere. They tried to build up in Alaska. I just think that people like Ted Cruz need to remember that Tom Coburn paved the way for these guys to do what they do.
I have to say Joshua. You know, the first chapter of Joshua, the scripture says, God says to Joshua, haven't I commanded you not to fear? And I think about the challenges that face our country. And I think there are a lot of people who have just given up on this idea of the American dream. And somehow our fate is just to fade into the oblivion and to become some second-class nation to China or North Korea. And I don't believe that. I believe that God is raising up new leaders with a vision. The Bible says that my people perish for lack of vision. Without a vision, the people will perish. And what I know is this. What I know is that if God has called you, He has equipped you as well to make the decisions that the people will believe in. And what we have had from this past administration is really a lack of leadership. And I say Joshua, you know, when Joshua was looking to take over as the leader of the nation of Israel, he was concerned and he was scared because he knew what a great job Moses has done. And much like we mentioned about Dr. Coburn has done a great job of, you know, laying out a clear vision of what's right and what's wrong. That the debt that we have right now is a challenge, it is a problem for future generations, and we need a new generation of leadership to go to Washington, D.C., and to change it, and to be like. The Bible has called us as Christians to be both salt and light to the rest of the world. As Speaker of the House, I was honored to get to work with some of the most amazing people, like Representative Van Coos, people who know how to get a prayer through, and I know that they're out there, and I would be honored to have your support and your vote.
Mine's not going to sound as inspiring as any of these, but it's going to be honest. Joe. I look at what's happened to this country, and it's wearing me out. And I'm thinking, when can it end? And I don't know how many of you feel, but I just feel like giving up sometimes, but I never do. And this is going to be a tough task. And I'm going to be honest with you. They'll give you all these great speeches. I can't guarantee you a victory. I can't guarantee we're going to win. What I can tell you is I will fight until I drop dead. And that's a fact. Let me explain this to you. Since second grade, this is almost 40 years ago, I haven't missed a day of work or school except for 3. One of those was the birth of my second child. Notice I didn't miss my first. The other one was the day I filed for Senate, and the other one was the day my dad died. That's the only time I've ever missed work. Now, I want you to look at the records of these people. And if somebody has missed 80% of their votes in the last session, you have to ask yourself, how committed are they? Do they have the power to hang in there when it gets rough? This is a tough job. We're not running for ministers, we're not running for student council president, we're running for the Senate, and this person is going to have to represent this state. You want somebody tough. And I don't mean strong. And these guys call me in a fight. I'm not that strong. Okay, otherwise I'm going to be a professor. But I am tough, and I'll hang in there no matter what.
Love that, don't you? Why not? See, you weren't expecting a question like that, but it's kind of good to hit them with these things. So, even the answers surprised me. So, very interesting. Okay. How about we head back along the trail of something that's a little different? What issue is most important to you? The economy, health care, waste and fraud in government? What is it? And what will you do about that issue as a senator?
Well, those are all connected, as a matter of fact. And by the way, when you talk about going back to another thing, faith is connected to life as well. So in the Bible, if you disconnect those, it's really not faith, it's a hobby. But that's a whole different issue. So I would say this, we have to wrap around our budget. The budget issues are driving our economy right now. They're driving choices that are happening around the world. They're weakening our position internationally. This is no simple issue. You can't just walk in and say, we'll balance the budget tomorrow if we'll just fill in the blank. That might have been true 15 years ago. That's not where we are anymore. What has happened over the past 20 years in the ramp up of debt and the ramp up of deficit spending continues to punish our economy in many ways and left us in a spot where we're extremely vulnerable. Personally, economically, and our position in the world is weakened. We can't get on top of our economy. If we can't get on top of the budget issues, we're not going to get there. Now I'm going to tell you we're not going to get there in a month. And anyone who tells you next month I can balance the budget just like that, I would always ask the question, show me. Because I live and breathe the budget issues all the time. And there are no simple answers anymore to what we're dealing with. Total discretionary spending in our whole federal government for all of our discretionary spending is $1,014 billion. Our deficit right now is $550 billion. Someone can show me and say, okay, let's do a 50% sequester across the board. We just had all the big issues and yelling and screaming over 2%. What's going to look like over 50? So we have to deal with this, though, because it affects our position in the world and it affects how we do our day-to-day life.
And the kind of people we're dealing with are the people who crammed Obamacare down our throat with a procedural vote. These people are not interested in negotiating. That's why we have to stand our ground now, saying balance the budget, bring the fight to them. It's the fight we need to fight. Criticism and debate is good. It's good. This right here, this is good. JFK said he welcomed criticism and debate. It was the lifeline or the blood of the Republic. So The budget is connected to each and every other issue that is affecting our nation. And then I also have to say, abortion. We cannot let that issue slip away and ignore it. The preamble of the Constitution says we secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. So, and I pose a question, who is our posterity but the unborn?
Without a doubt, it's our debt. $18 trillion. Anybody out here tonight have a newborn child or grandchild? Newborn? Anybody? There's no life for a newborn? I see, well, Darcy Klein, I forgot about that. You know what that child inherited from its federal government? $174,000 worth of debt. Let me say that again. $174,000 worth of debt. None of us in this room had to tolerate that. None of us in this room had to inherit that from our federal government, and neither should the next generation of Americans. In fact, when you hear this administration and the talking heads out of Washington talk about the problem, you know what they will tell you? They will tell you the reason we can't do it is because we have a revenue problem. We don't have enough revenue. Well, let me tell you, we have record revenue coming into the United States Treasury, more revenue than we've ever had in the history of this country. We do not have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We need to stop the spending. We need to stop the
You know, by training, I'm an ancient historian. I'm old. I'm an ancient historian. I studied the Greeks and the Romans. And there's a word that we use called patriotism. Patriotism comes from the Latin patria. It means fatherland. And the Romans had this notion of something called pietas. And pietas is where we get the word piety. It means you had a devotion, you had a duty to God. For them it was God, but for us, God. The family, and your fatherland. Notice I didn't say country. I hate the word country. I hate the word nation. I like the word fatherland. And the thing is basically that's it. You're loyal to a place because that's the land of your family. Family is the number one thing. The defense of family. Everything revolves around that. Let me give you an example. You know, if you ever read Marx, Marx is not interested in setting up a socialist society. He's really not. Go read the Communist Manifesto. He wants the destruction of the family. That's a fact. Now, here's the thing. You look at Obamacare, you know what's wrong with Obamacare? The worst thing? It's anti-family. Because they say, oh, no, we're going to take care of you. Well, here's the thing. If your employer provides you with insurance, one person, the rest of them can't get on that program. So this incentivizes poor people to divorce in order to get insurance. We have an anti-family agenda. Family's it. Everything else we can survive. No society can survive if the family crashes. The only question we need to ask is it pro-family or anti-family? That's the only question we need to ask, period.
I truly believe that the worst thing facing us as I like the word republic,
Good word.
is the debt. And it's already been mentioned a couple of times, $18 trillion. Every American taxpayer has a debt-choking noose hung around our neck right now to the tune of about $170,000. Every man, woman, and child in America today owes the federal government $54,000. Why? Because of bad ideas, bad policy, bad politics from a lot of careless politicians in Congress. I want to make a promise to you. If I'm your next U.S. Senator, I will never, under any circumstances, vote to increase the debt limit. $18 trillion is too much. It's destroying my kids' future. TW asked if there was any new babies. Well, I got a new grandbaby coming in September, and I want my new grandson to have the opportunity to live this dream that I've lived my entire life. But this debt crisis that we're facing is killing our future. No new debt coming from me.
Okay, if I ask one more question, we will start with Eric and go back through, or we could start with our 2-minute closings. So, I'm inclined to think, because we started just a little bit late, and want to make sure the time is maximized, I know everybody's warm, but I think if I ask one more question and you all give, it's going to be pretty open-ended, a short response to that, then we will start with you, Eric, and then when we get ready to go to the closing statements, we're going to go in reverse order and we'll go back this way. That way you'll get to answer a question and then we'll go back this way for the final 2 minutes. Okay, so one more question. And if you want to use less than your 90 seconds, because some of you have stretched that 90, that would be terrific. This one ought to be pretty easy. What is something that the public is unlikely to know about you, but would be important for them to know in considering whether to vote for you? So the question is, what is something that the public is unlikely to know about you, but would be important to them, or what you think might be important to them in deciding to vote for you?
Well, how do you be humble and answer this question? I'm a man of prayer. You would never know that about me just by meeting me. Prayer is my life. It's what I've been doing for quite a while. I pray for this guy right here. I pray for you. Pray for you.
I need a lot of them.
So I think that you have to be a man of prayer to serve the country, because you're going to have to be in a position where you can hear what the people are saying and hear what God's saying.
Excellent. People that can follow, he set the bar here for you. That was like 30 seconds. No pressure.
As you looked at me then. I would probably say work ethic. I'm usually up about 4:30. It drives my wife crazy, and I try to get all my emails answered by that time. And I'm usually not to bed to 12 or 1. So sleep is just not real high on my priority list. Now, eating usually is. That's a lot more important. But I will tell you this, there's nobody in this race that will get up earlier and stay up later to work and serve you. I did it as speaker, I've done it as a House member, and you have my commitment that there's nobody that's going to outwork me in this race or serving as your United States Senator.
Well, I was going to say work ethic, too. But let me say this. I don't mean this harsh, I mean it on the record. You can go out and check this up. If you don't believe anything any of us say, go check the record. You missed 80% of your votes in this last session. That's not hard work. Now, I have witnesses. I have former students that can tell you I taught class with a kidney stone attack. Find anybody in this room that's missed 3 days of work in the length of time that I talked about. I do have a hard work ethic. I'm a man of no major vices, but tons of small ones. But I do have one virtue. I'm tough. And I'll stick in there. And I'll stick in there even if it kills me. I'll fight for you. If people, the general public doesn't know this, talk to my former students. I'm known as what am I known as? Don't, if it's a dirty word, don't say it. What am I known as? Former students. That's right, the professor who doesn't sleep. They've seen me function on 2 hours of sleep in 1 week. Now, you're thinking, how did you do that? Well, for one thing, this morning I got up with a 235 blood sugar count. It's not healthy, but I can take care of that. But I'm doing this because I'm in this to win, because I think our country depends on this. So again, I'm not the strongest person in the fight. Any of these guys can take the fight, and Randy could too. Okay. In fact, he could take any of us in a fight. But I'm tough, and I'll hang in there.
I love my wife so much. Now, we've been married 41 years. Almost, it'll be 42 years in September. She was my high school sweetheart. I love my wife so much. This last year, she talked me into taking clogging lessons. Do we have any cloggers? Did I get you up there? I don't know if that would really want you to vote for me, but it does tell you about my commitment to my wife.
Randy doesn't mind anything. Well, what's funny about that, Randy, is that when you started, you were saying that we wouldn't know that you love your wife. I was like, I've seen you with Don before. I know you love your wife. Now I know the extent of your love. I think I don't know if people know this or not, but I'm a student. I love to study. I enjoy the research. One of the things about being in Congress is that you may deal with agriculture, then you may deal with education, then you may deal with energy, then you may deal with national defense, and then you may deal with environmental issues. You don't get the privilege of specializing in one area. You've got to be a student in all of them, and you've got to engage. And my passion is to study. I grew up as a debater. My mom was a librarian. I grew up in a library. And so my passion is to research, but it's not just to read and research, it's to research people. I want to actually go ask people hard questions. I want to find people that disagree with me. George Will makes a comment, says truth is not responsible for its owner. There are people that I may disagree with on other things, but may have a really good idea on that. And it's my obligation as a legislator to be able to go ask questions and to be able to listen and to bring conservative principles to the problems that we face. And I think that happens a lot when you actually get away from the stage, away from the cameras, sit down alone and do your work and actually go through and do the research that it takes to be able to be someone that's prepared for the task.
Okay, I think we're ready for the closing statements, but I don't know, David, if we do anything before that, or we go ahead and go to closing statements. Okay, I'm just honestly going to tell you, gentlemen, I've campaigned myself, and I have such incredible respect for what you are doing. I know how tough it is on your families, and when people say things that you want to respond back to that you don't feel like are quite accurate. So I just want to say I respect and appreciate every single one of you, and I thought you did an outstanding job because I threw all kinds of questions out of left field from you, and I think it was good to see how you handled those. So I think you should be extremely proud of all of these gentlemen for how they fought on their feet, they shared their lives with us. And they put up with a moderator like me. So, Eric, we'll start this way. I think it's 2 minutes, right, for the closing, and we'll work with number 5 back down to number 1. And again, this was the order that they drew, so everyone just be reminded of that.
Balance the budget now. We don't need to wait 10 years to get to point zero to balance the budget. Rein in the federal government. A senator is going to have to be someone who can give advice and consent on treaties. He's going to have to be prepared whether or not to vote. To send our nation, to send Oklahoma troops to war. I've spent over a year overseas in Afghanistan, not just as a troop, because when you go as a troop you're still around other Americans, but I was exposed to Afghans, Pakistanis, Azaris, Tajiks. I've been months in Latin America. So if I do have to make difficult decisions, I have something to draw from besides looking at reports. We need to rein in the federal government. We need to protect our liberties. And we need a statesman to go to Washington who can continue the legacy that Dr. Coburn has made, and someone who will stand on his shoulders. And I ask for your vote June 24th.
Thanks for coming, y'all. There are a lot of things you can do on a Friday night besides do this. This tells me you're very engaged. We anticipate somewhere around 250,000 people will vote in the Republican primary, and they'll settle who the next senator will be. In a state of 4 million people, 250,000 will actually get involved in that process. It's obvious y'all are part of that righteous remnant. Thank you for staying engaged and actually doing your homework and trying to do this. This is important for the future of the nation as well. For us and our family, when I went to Congress 3.5 years ago and started the process, walking from a non-political background and walking into that, after about 6 months, I remember calling my wife one day, late one evening, and saying, I've had this deja vu feeling since I've been here, like I've been here and experienced this emotion before, and I finally figured out what it was. It's middle school lunch. There's not a place that I've been before since middle school lunch that you sit around and you get praised for attacking other people. The more belittling you are, the more everybody says, way to go, way to stick it to them. The more you make fun of someone else, from your party or from someone else's, someone goes, way to go, high five. It's middle school lunch. We all grew past that, supposedly, and then reverted back to it in Congress. I believe you can do politics and do the greatest commandment at the same time. I believe that you can't actually live biblical principles there and here. And I believe you've got to find a way to actually turn around and face the problems we face today. Now, my frustration when I got there with not only middle school lunch was about how many people that I'd seen on television that talked great about all of the different problems. But when I got there, really there were no options that were being discussed for solutions. We've got to be able to solve these issues. When we talk about problems, everybody nods their head. We've got to move past just, yes, we all agree there's a problem, to here's a list of solutions. Let's start, let's go with step one, and let's get this done. We've got to move past just yelling at each other. I would be absolutely honored to be able to have your vote and your support. This is a big election and a big decision for everyone in that. You can find out more information on other issues. Dana brought up almost everything, but you can find out other information at jameslangford.com. You can find other things there. So, honored to be able to have your support.
You know, probably one of the best ways to judge what an elected official would do in the future is to look at their past and see how they conducted themselves and what they brought to the table. And Representative Langford said it well. There are a lot of problems that we're facing today. Now, when I served you for the 8 years in the state senate, I didn't just talk about lower taxes and limited government. I didn't just talk about trying to protect your property rights. I didn't just talk about it. I performed and I worked hard to take care of those issues while I served you in that capacity. Let me give you a few of the pieces of legislation that were sweeping reform legislation that I was able to get passed. The Taxpayer Transparency Act. Every one of you have the opportunity now to go online and see the spending habits of the politicians at 23rd and Lincoln. When I talked about lower taxes, I wrote the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Concerned about our personal identity, I wrote legislation to repeal the unconstitutional act pushed down from Congress that was stealing our identity and using it on a global database. We nullified that legislation. I wrote the legislation for term limits for statewide elected officials. You voted on that in 2010, and it overwhelmingly passed. In order to protect our property rights, I wrote legislation to stop dead in its tracks the natural superhighway from confiscating 37,000 acres here in Oklahoma. Folks, I don't just talk it. I have a track record to prove that I will do what I will say, and I want to make you feel comfortable with this today. I'm willing to serve you in this capacity. Washington, D.C. has never been on my bucket list, but I'm willing to serve you, and I'm ready to fight for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me attend this forum with you. RandyBrogdon.com. Thank you.
I mentioned this issue once before, and I'll bring it up again. The thing that really brought me into this race was the Senate's reaction from the 2008 financial meltdown. Now, the Senate's supposed to be deliberative on it. It's supposed to take its time. Instead, it rushed through this measure that's essentially doubled our money supply. As I said earlier, $85 billion a month. Now, it's been brought down about half of that now. But we've doubled the money supply. What does that mean? Well, first of all, it means this. Like I said, milk, $1.89, now it's $5 a gallon. You go out and buy fuel, same thing, even though we're producing more. That's not the oil company's fault. That's the devaluation of the currency. You go buy groceries, you see this. This is destroying families. That's a fact. I know because I got 2 kids, okay? It's entering into it. Now let me mention this. We have good people up here. That's a fact. That is a fact. Here's the thing. Washington is going to be tough. This is not a job, we're not running for minister. We're not running for student council president. We're running for the Senate. Now, Jesus even found one time where he had to use a little temper there too. And what was that? The money changers. Boom! You've got to stand up to them sometime. Now that's a fact. I'm not the nicest candidate in this. I'll tell you that right now. But I'm the toughest. Do you want to send a nice guy to Washington, or do you want to send a tough guy to Washington? That's the question you need to ask yourself when you go to the ballot box. No, I'm not an evil person. I'm just not a nice guy. I am a tough guy. I am consistent, and I am honest. I think I've only made 2 ballots where I've messed up on. One time I said that I've been a professor for 20 years. That's not true. I've taught at some level for 20 years. I said that one day. I've actually been a professor about 10 years, but I've taught 20 years at the university. I think the other time I messed up is one time I said a law was passed on October the 29th. It was passed on October 30th. But other than that, there's only 2 things I found that I've mistaken on. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Well, friends, thank you for joining us tonight. It's been an honor and a privilege of a lifetime for me to represent this area for the last almost 8 years now. In fact, this is real home for me. I met my wife just a few blocks away from here on this campus. Literally, I was driving my car and she threw her cell phone and begged me to take That's not the true story. In fact, but I do want to tell you this in closing. You've heard a lot of policy discussions, but after this next election, it's not just about who gives the best speeches. It's not just about who claims that they've got the best record. This is a fight for the direction of our country. I want to take you back to the day I decided to get into this race. It was right after Dr. Coburn had announced that he was stepping down. It was actually on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday. And my parents had told me that there was a documentary I needed to see and watch that was coming on, I think it was PBS or one of the other public stations. And I was watching it about Dr. King and how he had led the civil rights movement and used this new medium of communication to change public opinion. And I remember the day my dad had come over. Dad's here tonight. He's made it his mission in life to teach my 5-year-old son how to ride his bike without training wheels. And we had the windows up. It was a nice day. And literally, it hit me like a ton of bricks as I was watching this documentary. I realized our country's come a very long way in a very, very short period of time. When my dad was a young man, he had to drink out of a separate water fountain. In fact, when we talked to my daughter about it, she's 8 years old. You know what she says? She's heard about, separate but equal and water fountains. You know what she says? Well, Daddy, why didn't Granny and Papa just drink out bottled water? and my point is this. My point in saying that is she can't even imagine an America that is separate but equal. And that's a good thing. That means we've come a very long way in a very short time. What that tells me is there's still hope out there. There is still optimism. If we can come that far in less than 1 generation on such an issue that was so deeply woven into the fabric of who we are, fixing our fiscal house is not that difficult. We can do it, but it's going to take leadership, people that are willing to stand, and I'm willing to do it. Thank you.